my pleasure to announce this talk of Moritz Mähr. Moritz studied banking and finance, as well as philosophy and history of knowledge and computer science in Zurich and Berlin, and worked as CTO and project manager in the private sector. From 2018 to 2020, Moritz worked at the Collegium Helveticum in the fellow project Autonomies in the Digital Society, and was research assistant at the chair of the history of technology at the ETH Zurich. Today, he's project manager for the Stadtgeschichte Basel project at the University of Basel. His research focuses on the history of technology, in particular the interactions between computers and administration, digital humanities, and digital history. Today, he's going to talk about research data management in public history.
Thank you very much for having me here. Yes, I'll give you a short field report from my work from the historical research project Stadtgeschichte Basel. I'll start with Stadtgeschichte Basel in a nutshell, tell you how this research project came into existence and what my role is. This will lead us to the task and especially to the challenges of a research data manager. And then I'll try to explain to you how I tackle research data management and how I try to do public history with research data, and then a short conclusion. Okay, Stadtgeschichte Basel in a nutshell. It's the official history of the Canton Basel City from 200 BC to the present day. We will release 10 printed volumes, 8 of which are epochal volumes, 1 thematic and 1 overview volume, which is geared towards a broader public. We have over 70 authors, which means that depending on the volume, it's 3 up to 15 authors. There are several teams with archaeological and historical backgrounds working on these volumes. And we have a budget of over 9 million and a project duration of 8 years. So we are quite stacked. And one of these millions are actually meant to be used for the digital, whatever that means. So in 2011, there was a civil society association and some motions in the parliament that called for a new history for Basel City. In 2016, the cantonal government actually decided to go with a credit of 6 million. And later on, the parliament granted this project credit of 4.4 million. And there's 1.6 million that came from the lottery fund, 2.3 million that were pledged by private donors. And we are still some 400,000 short. So if you want to chip in, you can gladly do it. I'll send you the IBAN afterwards. In early 2017, the Civil Society Association handed over the project to a newly established foundation. And the foundation boards of directors, which consist of also public figures in Basel City, set up an editorial board to steer the content. This editorial board is mainly consisting of professors of University of Basel and also professionals in education, history education. In the summer of 2017, the project management began its work. And in the fall of 2018, the authors actually started to do research at the Department of History and Department of Asian Cultures. The digital strategy was developed in 2020 by the Digital Committee of the editorial board and by the Digital Advisory Board, where Tobias also is part of. And it was adopted in January 21. This is now, where I came in October 2021, I was hired as a digital project manager for research data management and digital education. It was quite hard because at the same time I was finishing with my thesis at DHCH, so a lot to do. But it was fun to get into this project, and as I had no clue what they were doing, I thought, okay, let's start with surveys to see what they were actually doing. And this is what I was doing until, or planning until the December of 2021. And it's also the most important topic that I will address today, like the service, getting to know your audience, getting to know your researchers. And in April 2022, the concept for implementing the digital strategy was approved, the concept that I came up with. So for the future, we will have a concept for digital and analog education, which will be developed by September 2022. We will start in October to publish the first data stories, which form part of the education. Like it's based on research data, and it's also kind of a lab for all the researchers in the project, because there's not really a best practice for how to do data storytelling in history. In October 2023, the educational work with our outreach partners will begin. I will later on come back to who these outreach partners actually are. And in the same month, we will launch the prototype of an online portal and replace the existing homepage, because there's a new corporate identity also coming up, so that people won't get confused by seeing different colors and different fonts or types and stuff. And starting in January 2024, the volumes will gradually go on sale. So, tasks and challenges of the research data management. The mission, according to the agreement with the canton from 2017, was that we were to construct an online portal. I'll just read it to you. It is designed as a virtual repository providing public access to a wide range of data on Basel's history. The portal will be designed and organizationally integrated in such a way that it can be continued and continuously updated after the end of the 8-year project period. A lot of wishful thinking, as you can see, because nobody knows how to actually do such an online portal. Or it's Stargate or something, I don't know. But then there's also this other thing that I am supposed to do, the continuous public visibility and the dialogue with future users of a city history are important concerns of the project. Interested members of the public are already given the opportunity to take a look at the project or to actively participate during the ongoing work on the new city history. Also quite a tough point, especially when there's no research conducted already that I could show to the people, right? Like it's in the making, history in the making. So the specific task according to the digital strategy that was meant to flesh out the mission that was stated by the canton is actually research data management, simply put, collection, curation, and preservation of research data, and some kind of showcases that we are going to develop for the presentation and distribution of relevant data and media. So this is not the only thing that I need to handle. It's also quite a tough organizational structure because it's such a huge project. Like the foundation carries the project and is liable to the donors. Like we also have these donors as a stakeholder group, which is quite unique for an academic project. The board of the foundation is responsible for the strategy in large budget items. So I need to convince people that are actually outside of academia of what we are doing. There's the editorial board that ensures the scientific quality and is responsible for the content and makes strategic decisions together with the project management. And the editorial board is a quite academic forum. So we need to handle from the project management, like the communication with academics and non-academics at the same time. In August 2017, as I already told you, there was the project management team set up. And in the first place, it was a analog project management in terms of they were mainly concerned with the books, like with the volumes we were going to write. I joined in October 2021, and I'm supported by a team of data stewards. Like I needed to actually set up the team by myself. What kind of roles do I need? What kind of people do I need to do my job? And I'm supported also by the digital advisory board. And the whole project is handled by the University of Basel. So somehow I'm employed by the University of Basel, but financed by the foundation, and nobody knows exactly who my boss is. So there's another complication. We have so many cooperation partners, and these cooperation partners at the same time are also data sources. We have the University Library Basel, we have the state archives of the both cantons of Basel, we have the Historical Museum, Art Museum, Land Registry and Survey Office, and probably also the Statistical Office. And we have our outreach and educational partners like the Women's City Tour or other kinds of city tours, schools, and all the GLAM institutions. So how to tackle research data management in such a project? When I ask historians, do you have research data? They usually say, no, we don't have research data. And if you ask them, do you have digitized archival sources? They say, yeah, a lot, really nice archival sources. And the problem is that we are kind of missing as historians the difference between digitized sources and data. Because somehow when we digitize sources, they become data. And this is something that Thorsten Hildmann pointed out 2018 during a conference on research data management in history. And he proposed a definition of what research data actually meant in history, while the narrower term of research data actually included only data generated in the concrete research process of the individual projects, such as the text annotations or metadata. The broader term also included the sources underlying the historical research process as a whole, as they are scientifically processed by libraries, archives, and museums, and thus made available for potential use by researchers. Okay, this is quite a clear definition. Now, how we go about this, and he proposes two kinds of solutions. The first one is standards. As long as the direct processing of the source is done by the historian himself, by his reading, hearing, or seeing, the requirement for such standards are relatively low and concern primarily technical aspects in the background. If, however, we want to process the sources as data by machine, things look quite different, especially if the machine is to be able to execute our queries and analysis simultaneously across as many different data sources as possible. And as you might remember, I'm the guy who should construct this online portal, so that's for me, right? Standards, okay, nice idea. What else could we do? We could do software. Marina Mähr, who also attended this conference, explained what she was building for her project. FUD is a software system that supports the entire scientific work process in its various research phases and enables collaboration independent of location and time. It is designed for the qualitatively researching humanities and social sciences and consists of 3 subcomponents: the working environment for data acquisition, processing, analysis and evaluation, the publication environment for the online presentation of digital holdings, the data repository VIDA5 for the creation of data collections and their enrichment with archival metadata for at least 10 years of storage or their long-term provision. Like, it sounds perfect, right? Everybody would want exactly that. So what's my problem? Great ideas, but will my researchers actually use standards or software? No, they won't. It is hard to enforce these software when the research is already in progress and paid for. Like, I'm coming in too late with standards. And the fact that it's such a large project and not just like 4 people doing with the same or dealing with the same methods, but a plethora of different methods and different people, it's even harder to find standards that could solve problems for 70+ authors. And it's very expensive to develop such a digital research environment and time-consuming to train researchers. And we don't have enough time or money left to do that. So, what is research data in our case? I needed to understand how research data and what's generated and how our researchers actually work. So I thought, okay, we just need to go where they do their research and ask them. And the question of what exactly is data needs to be addressed for each research project and sometimes for each group within a research project, which makes it quite hard because there's no general notion of research data. Therefore, we ask our researchers about what data they collect and what tools they use to do so. The survey was very well received by the authors. I might want to add that there's probably some kind of selection bias, that the people who participated already wanted to do some kind of research data management. But 40% participated and they wanted also to know about the results of the survey. So we are going through this survey because I think this is a really interesting thing. Almost nobody has this kind of data, and it's quite possible that later on in your career, you will do something like me in a project like Stadtgeschichte Basel. Okay, what tools do you use to develop a research question? Interestingly, paper. Paper is a really important tool for historians, as we can see as I go forward. And word processor, it's actually just one word processor, it's Microsoft Word. And even like mind maps and clustering methods are relatively seldomly used in this context. And we also allow people to, with free text, to say whatever they wanted. And there's fun story, like people actually doing notes in Microsoft Excel. You could also do that if you wanted. Yes, and even though we have Zotero as a standard for reference managers, as a standard reference manager, people also use Citavi. So I deal with a lot of anarchists in my project. How do you store this data? As you can see, the personal computer, quite important, like they don't even back it up on the network drive of the university. And the physical folder is also quite important because a lot of people actually print out what they use in their research. And commercial cloud providers. I think Dropbox is one of them. most commonly used. Where do you search for secondary literature? This is interesting because everybody's apparently already working digitally. Like it's like they all start out with online resources. It's so important to them. And there's no awareness of actually working digitally, which is funny, and you have to deal with it. And how do you keep track of secondary literature and excerpts? And this is where you also have this like break of media where you go back to paper, because somehow this is how we were taught to work as historians. Then where do you search for sources? And also when it comes down to sources, like the very bread and butter of every historian, we work digitally. And this is also reflected in my project. What sources or data do you collect or use? Everybody uses text sources. Images also are quite important for 83%. And then there's also time series and statistics, which are used by 53% of the researchers. And this is quite interesting because there's not like only historians of history of economy or of statistics in my team. Like these statistics, they won't end up in the publication. They are just like to illustrate a point or to generate evidence during the research process. And they use it a lot. So we already have some kind of cliometrics, like people using numbers all the time in their research, even though it won't end up in the actual text. And people have they have very sophisticated systems to collect their notes. Like usually it's not a wiki system or a Zettelkasten, but there's some kind of system they use. It's an idiocratic system, and it's an unstandardized system. What are the formats of these data? And obviously text, images, and what is also very interesting, tables. Like there's more people actually using tables than working with numbers. So I haven't figured out yet how they use the tables, apart from the note-taking part in Excel. And it's also very interesting that every other format is not used at all. Like you wouldn't have georeferences, and you wouldn't have video or audio sources. Really interesting fact that we are so much focused on textual data. And for what purpose do you collect this data? Okay, this was the first answer was kind of a trick answer to to actually substantiate statements, but a lot of people actually use it to create maps or networks, because this is also some intermediate representation that you would use during your research. And it's also not in the final publication, but people do use it. And there's also quantitative analysis, because apparently it's really important for us as a piece of evidence to actually look at the statistics. Does this make sense, what I claim? Even though it's only a trend analysis that you do with statistical data. Which tools do you use to annotate, process these sources? PDF software, really important. Then again, spreadsheet. And this is really interesting because spreadsheets are used all over the place for somehow the organization of sources. Like you would think of probably of Zotero or even Tropy to do the source management, but a lot of people do this with Excel, because this is, yeah, it's easier if you come from paper. It makes more sense to you if you come from paper. And there's this small group that actually uses georeferenced data, and it's mainly from archaeological research, because they're really good with software. Like there's this 2 volumes that I don't have to teach anything because they know already everything, and there's the rest of the bunch that need some training. How do you keep track of the sources? Also over here, it's quite interesting that even though we have a literature management software that everybody is supposed to use, only 40% of those who participated in the survey use it. I mean, there's probably even less people using it overall in the project. Would you attend a training session? And this is nice because most people would like a training session, and this is something that we can help with. And there's also the need for training that hasn't actually anything to do with the actual project, but more with how you could advance in your career. Okay, how to solve the problem. I hired data stewards for the 4 most predominant data types. That's images and figures, that's maps and georeferences, tables and statistics, and you know what I mean. Project-wide solutions have been defined for common data types. This means for the references and the images, and specific solutions are provided for the less used data types, like if it comes down to maps, because there you need to know whether it's a topographical map or just an illustration. Becomes complicated. And over there we are just kind of a support unit for the project. And then the most interesting part for me was where to actually collect the data. And there's only one point. It's when the book manuscript comes in, because then the historians are serious. It needs to be good. It needs to be right. Everything needs to be checked. And this is why we actually piggyback on this process. This minimizes the workload for the authors and centralizes the data quality control. But it also means that we only have the research data that actually goes into the volumes, and everything else is lost. But it's kind of an 80-20 rule that I'm applying. And we offer free training, which is very well received. How to do public history with research data. The problem is research data and public history, they don't go well together. As we already figured out earlier this afternoon, if you give someone an API, even though it's a nice API with an open JSON documentation stuff, they won't use it. Research data must actually always be produced for a very specific audience. And this is somehow counterintuitive, because this image we have in our head, it's just like data is something that happens while we work and we just have to collect it, but it never works like this. And research data is always part of a data ecosystem, especially for historians that work with archives or galleries or museums. The data is already there. You only have to actually establish a link to this data. And this is why we thought, okay, we need to tap or populate existing data pools and not create our own, which is also something that is important, because our project is only financed for 8 years. And afterwards, the data needs to live on in an institution that can actually support long-term preservation of the data. The public cannot be educated directly with research data. They need intermediaries. This is especially because we, as researchers, we have a very specific eye to our data. And we have our questions that we pose, and we have no clue how to educate people with the data alone. We know how to write a story, but that's the way we educate people with the data. But the data alone is something different. And this is why we work with professional outreach and education partners, for example, from the media, radio stations, museums, or the city tours, as I mentioned before. And I wanted to know how these outreach partners actually went about finding out about Basel history. Like what sources do they consult? What online services or offline services do they actually use? Because we wanted to fit into this ecosystem. And if you want to do successful public history, you need them on board, because you can't talk to the public directly. So know your audience. We surveyed selected people from the field of galleries, libraries, archives, and museum, as well as operators and schools with whom we would like to collaborate. So it's what we actually want. It's not a sample from the general population, but we know the players in Basel we want to collaborate with, and we ask them. And over 90 people actually took part in the survey. They are coming from research, other hard to know. I guess we didn't split it into specific categories. This is why a lot of them selected other. We have outreach, archives, education. And the most interesting fact is that the average age is 57. So we don't need a TikTok account, probably, and no Instagram account to get to our audience. What is your interest in the history of Basel? And it's also very interesting that the last 200 years is the main interest. And it has something to do with how, I guess, people think about the past. Like you can think of your great-granddad and stuff like this, but if it's further back, then it somehow gets blurry. And this is something you can also do marketing with. Like people can easily imagine the last 200 years. It's an open question whether we want to respect that fact and only focus on the last 200 years, or if we want to do it differently. But it's a hard sell if you come with archaeological facts and stuff. Then there's some interest in personalities and institutions and locations. Interestingly, there's only men that people are interested in as historical figures. And there's a lot of stuff that you would actually expect, like FC Basel, or the separation of the two cantons. Then the Rhine is really important, and the bridges over the Rhine and stuff like this. So this is more or less what we expected. Which topics in Basel history are of particular interest to you? I somehow didn't include the figure, but it's mostly about urban life, culture, social affairs, education, politics. It's mostly stuff from everyday life, and it's stuff from everyday life of people who are 50 plus. So which online information services do you use to learn about the history of Basel? And this is really interesting that people use the historic lexicon of Switzerland the most. Like it's a professional resource. And I didn't know that outside of the discipline, this was also regarded as such an important source for information. And then there's the Basel City Book, which is a kind of public history project that was published some years ago, which is also very cool, the university library and Wikipedia. We also ask about the offline information services, and books are very important. And this is actually good news for us because we are writing books. So apparently our audience wants to read books. And they also want to go to the archives and museums and read about us in magazines. So we need to focus also on offline services and products. How do you process and/or convey historical content? Do you use sources or data for preparation, implementation, and so on? Over here also, no surprises, text, images, and maps, and everything else is quite foreign to most people. Where do you look for sources? This is also quite in alignment with how the researchers do it. And an interesting question for me was, what form of presentation do you use? Because this in the end is how they talk to the public. And it's a lot of offline text, like 70% are using offline text. They're using visualization, but only a quarter of them or a third. And audio, interactive visualizations and video are used by less than 11%. This is crazy for us. But this also means for us that we need to give them something, research data, that they can use to produce their own texts, because this is what they do afterwards. So how to solve the problem? There's a need for target group-oriented digital and analog services and products for the mediation of research data. Collaborate with existing providers, integrate existing services and data. Identify and address gaps, as well as the data gaps and also the services gaps in this ecosystem. What I also really strongly advise you to do is do small projects, rapid prototyping, as was presented by Adi, and do monitoring, ongoing monitoring. Just ask people what they think of it. Because if you start out with a really huge data model, you are going not wasting your time, but you don't know how successful this will be in the end. Just start with something smaller and you can make it big afterwards. And it's really important to have low technical and legal barriers to entry, because this is how you increase the chance of reuse of data. And with legal barriers, I mean, you have to have licenses that allow for commercial use. This is something that most academics don't want, but you have to push forward to make it available also to service providers. Because even a private school couldn't use your research data if it was only under Creative Commons non-commercial use. Okay, I conclude with research data management is not an end in itself. It's strategic and operational, and this is why you need to set these priorities. Research data management is costly and demands a lot from all parties involved. Therefore, it should be simple, practical, and accessible. Research practices are subject to change. Research data management can influence them. This is something that I didn't talk about, but it's quite important to know that you can actually change the way researchers do their research. It's a slow process, it needs a lot of training, but it works. Because if you have a good offering, they probably change the way they work. And you can also influence them by setting some boundaries on how the printed volumes are done, because this is what really matters to them. You just have to know what matters to them to ensure that you get the data in a form that you can actually use it. And research data is produced for a specific audience. Researchers are actually not the only audience for research data, and this is a biggie. So thank you for your attention. And yes, you may hit me with some questions.